If you long to know the mind of God, you must learn to use your own. That's apologetics.
Personally, for me, I don't think I could have become a Christian unless I saw that there were people like Norm to tell me why this is true, not what you think is true. Tell me why this is true.
People have objections to faith, and they must overcome those objections to faith before they can freely trust in the Lord Jesus for salvation. Well, that's what apologetics does.
And it's not just answering people's questions. It's an entire outlook of what does it mean to be a Christian.
My father blended the three areas of apologetics, philosophy, and theology to give us a practical understanding of the relationship between faith and reason.
He uses an analogy of an elevator. If there was an elevator in front of you and the lights are off in the room and it's dark and you can't see what's in the elevator, getting in the elevator would just be blind faith. Reason is testing first to see if there's a floor, not because of a feeling, but I can explain and look and investigate and test and know that what I believe has grounding.
We take a step of faith in the light, but we don't take a leap of faith in the dark.
So it's good to be with you guys today. And what I'm going to be talking about is really dear to me. There are things that I learned from Dr. Norman Geisler years ago that were just revolutionary for me. Completely transformed my life and changed my way of thinking. And some of the things that Dr. Geisler taught us in seminary, I would just go home and I remember thinking on the way home, just, oh my goodness, I can't believe this. This is real. Suddenly God became this real person who was everywhere. And he was able to take God from being this impossible being that's kind of out there to being, wow, now I know this is real. I know that the Christian faith is true. I know that God actually exists. And it totally changed everything for me. So here's what we're going to be covering in this session. First, I want to introduce what the problem is, that most Christians simply are just not equipped to impact our society today. And I'm going to cover that by going through my own personal story and also talking about what our culture is going through, what the United States is going through, and what's happening in general in the world. And then the next section is the solution. How can we get equipped to impact and engage our culture for the Lord? And then the third segment, some basic arguments on God's existence, and then how do you know that the Christian faith in general is true? I became a Christian when I was in college, but I was raised by a believing mother. My parents divorced when I was in 4th grade, and my mom became a really serious Christian after the divorce. And she raised me in church, especially from 4th grade on. So I had a theistic worldview, meaning I believed that there was a God. I believed that miracles were possible, that there's a moral order to the world, that humans are supposed to behave a certain way, that there's meaning and purpose, and that life is valuable, there's a proper way for us to behave, all of that, part of the biblical or the Christian worldview. And after I became a Christian, I became really excited about trying to share my faith because I wanted everybody to become a believer in Jesus also, right? So it was my freshman year in college that I became a really serious believer. And I noticed that as I shared my faith with people, they didn't really care about Jesus. And so I became frustrated because I thought, no, you don't understand. This is the coolest thing ever. And as I would try to tell them about Jesus and what happened in my life, I realized that people had all these reasons for not being a Christian. They had all these objections to the Christian faith that they would start throwing at me, and I didn't know how to respond to them. So I would ask some of my friends and spiritual mentors, and they didn't know how to respond either. And the problem is I was ignorant, and so were all my friends. We were ignorant of the 3-step apologetic method, which I'm going to briefly introduce now, and then we're going to cover it in great detail eventually in this session today. A 3-step method goes like this. Step 1 is you ground the proper philosophical foundation. How do you discover the truth about reality? And then after that, step 2 is the blue portion of the pyramid, the existence and attributes of God. How can you discover that God really exists? And then after that, how do you establish the truth of the Christian faith, that the Bible is from God? Now, usually when we share our faith, most Christians today would be starting assuming that the person you're talking to is open to believing all of these steps already. And so we'll start off and we'll say, well, Jesus died for your sins so you can be reconciled to God. And that's what the Bible teaches. And then what do you do if somebody says, well, I don't believe in the Bible. Well, then we would be in the red part of the pyramid, and we would try to give them reasons for believing that the Bible is from God and Christianity is true. And then they might say, well, I don't believe the Bible could be from God because I don't even believe in God. Well, then we have to drop down to the second step of the method, the blue part of the pyramid, and try to give them reasons for believing that God exists. And then they might say, well, you know what? That's true for you, but not for me. And then we would have to drop down to the purple part of the pyramid to explain that if something is true, it's true for everybody to believe. Now, you don't have to know these three steps to be a Christian. You can lead people to the Lord without using apologetics, but if you want to reach a broader range of people, you're gonna have to learn how to ground the faith and use these three steps. When I became a strong believer my freshman year in college, I didn't know how to share my faith intelligently, and I thought, I need to major in religious studies. Maybe that will help me. Well, if you know anything about majoring in religious studies at a secular university, that's basically like getting a degree in why Christianity is false. So my professors would bring up these objections to the Christian faith, and I couldn't answer them. And then people that I'm evangelizing, trying to share Christ with, they would bring up objections. I would ask my spiritual mentors, how do we respond when people ask these questions about the problem of evil, God's existence, and questions about the Bible? And they didn't know. And so they would say, well, Brian, that's what faith is. You just gotta believe. I thought, that just sounds like surrender to me, because it is. So I had a crisis of faith. I started thinking, you know what? It looks like it's just not true, because it looks like some of the smart people, a lot of the smart guys out there are not believers. And when I bring up these issues to Christians, they just go, well, that's what faith is. Now, the answers I was getting would be something called fideism. Okay? Most Christians today unknowingly advocate a position called fideism. The word fide is the Latin word for faith, and fideism simply means that all we need is faith, we don't need reason. You just gotta choose to believe. And I would say that the average Christian today has this position. I would say we're mass producing pastors who actually are being taught this same thing, because we are saved by faith, but we don't come to believe Christianity is true by faith. We use reasons to believe that, yeah, Jesus really did rise from the dead. And God has equipped us and given us everything we need to win the intellectual battle and to demonstrate that the Christian faith is true. After you know it's true, then you put your faith in Christ, rely on Christ for salvation. Now, the position of fideism is unscriptural. The Bible does not teach that. It does not teach that you just choose to believe it and to just ignore objections. And it's also irrational, and it's a losing position. And that's one reason why the church is in the predicament that it's in today. Now, the Bible actually does command us to learn to defend our faith. If you look at 1 Peter 3:15, it says, but in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a what? A defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. That word defense there, the Greek word in the New Testament there, it is the word apologia, which is where we get our word apologetics. It means to defend the faith. And it says that you need to have a reason prepared. So yes, use reason. It's not that we just choose to believe. That's not what's going on. Now, here's what's happening in our society. We have received a steady diet of some bad philosophies, all right, that contradict the Christian worldview. So if you look at our pyramid here, we're being hit with scientism. Scientism. That is the belief that science is the only way to know the truth about reality. We've been hit with materialism, which is the belief that matter is the only thing that exists, or at least the material world is the only thing that's knowable. And since God is immaterial, you can't know if there's a God or not. We're being hit with relativism, which is the belief that truth and morality are relative. There's nothing that's true for everybody. There's nothing that's morally right for everybody. And we're being hit with religious pluralism. Religious pluralism is the belief that all religions are true. It's okay if you believe in a God, as long as you believe that all religions are true, all religions lead to the same God, all right? Which is a kind of relativism applied to religions, what pluralism is. And then naturalism, which is sort of an all-encompassing worldview. It's a term that kind of encompasses everything that atheists would believe today. And we have lots of people who are Christians, or at least believe in God, but they live their life and they think in accordance with the naturalistic worldview, not in accordance with the theistic worldview. So naturalism would be the belief that all events are from natural causes, that there's no supernatural events, or at least that you can't know if there's a supernatural being. And we're also being hit with the new morality. The new morality would be redefining marriage, family, and sexuality. And what's happening is a lot of our young people are being told that if you're a male, you can become a female, that marriage can be defined however you want it to be. It doesn't have to be just one man and one woman. And then they start thinking, well, I guess the Bible it just teaches bigotry. It teaches homophobia. It teaches us to hate people who are transgenders, what they start thinking. And so they slowly begin abandoning the biblical worldview. And sometimes they'll still stay Christians, but they'll abandon biblical inerrancy. They'll think that the Bible is wrong about certain topics. Now, what are these bombs gonna do to my pyramid here? They're gonna go, and they're gonna blow a hole in my pyramid. Now what's gonna happen? It's gonna fall over. It's just gonna go, it's gonna fall right off. Now, everything changed for me after I had a friend of mine introduce me to apologetics. So that's basically what happened to me. My pyramid just blew up. And after I started learning about apologetics, I thought, man, why is this the first time I'm learning this? Every Christian needs to know this. How can you evangelize effectively without actually knowing some apologetics? So I dedicated my life to studying apologetics, okay? And I eventually learned that many of my questions that I had already been answered for about 1,000 years. And I studied biblical archaeology. And I lived in Israel for 6 months, and I just loved the evidential approach. The evidential approach would be using archaeology, history, and fulfilled prophecies, argument for Jesus' resurrection to argue for the truth of Christian faith. Little did I know, though, the evidential approach is an incomplete method. But it's all I had at that time, and it was sufficient. It's all I needed in order to restore my faith. Now, what happened to me with my faith getting wrecked is not unique. This is happening all over the world, well, especially in the Western world. Now, according to a study by the Pew Forum, what's the fastest growing religious group in the USA? It is no religious affiliation, no religion. That's what's growing faster than any other religious group. According to a study by USA Today and the Barna Group, what percentage of young people are abandoning church after high school? 70%. And some of them still claim to be Christians, but a lot of them say they no longer believe in the Bible. Now, what percentage of Americans who claim to be born-again Christians on a survey, what percentage do you think have a biblical worldview? The Barna Group found that only about 19% do. And some of the questions that were asked on the survey were, is God all-knowing? Is the Bible inerrant, or does it have errors? And so a lot of Christians no longer have a proper biblical worldview or Christian worldview. So what is the growing reputation of the church today among unbelievers? Are they like, oh yeah, Christians are great. Christians are just smart people. Is that what they say? No. Look what they say, we're irrational, ignorant, intolerant. Christianity's outdated. How are we doing in the culture war? Are we doing well? No, we're basically losing. We are losing people left and right. Well, why? Why is this happening? For the most part, it's because the average Christian today is no longer firmly grounded in the truth. So if you look at this picture here, which post would be easier to pull out of the ground? Obviously, it's going to be the what? It's going to be the smaller one. So the deeper that you are grounded in the truth, the harder it is to pull you out of it. So think of it like that. So which post are you? Well, what happened? Because it wasn't always like this. Prior to the 1800s, Christianity was considered a rational religion. And Christians were known for valuing the mind. And Christians dominated in science and philosophy. Once you get past the 1800s, closer to today, Christianity is considered an irrational religion. Fewer Christians are valuing the mind, especially as it concerns our faith. And secularists are dominating in science. And philosophy is pretty much dead these days. It's been pretty much just kicked out of the curriculum. We're going to discuss that because that's actually one reason why we have the problems that we have today. Because philosophy is the discipline that you use to ground the truth of the Christian faith, to ground God's existence, to defend the various doctrines of the Bible. It's how you're going to determine is life in the womb human or not. It's how you discover the definition of marriage. It's how you're going to discover sex and gender. Philosophy is necessary for all these issues that people are struggling to define and deal with today. So what happened? We have this gradual decline, if you look at our timeline here, of classical philosophy, classical theology, and classical apologetics, which has been taught for centuries in the church, but no longer It's pretty much leaving the churches. So what should we do? In 1 Chronicles 12, when talking about the tribe of Issachar, from the sons of Issachar, the Bible says that these men understood the times and had knowledge of what Israel should do. So what should we do? Our next segment, we're going to introduce the Geislerian Trifecta: classical philosophy, theology, and apologetics. Now, I'm calling it the Geislerian Trifecta. Norman Geisler never called it that because he was too humble to call it that. And he emphasized these three pieces of an overall puzzle that we're going to be discussing: classical philosophy, classical theology, and classical apologetics. And these three are interrelated. Together, they establish the truth of our faith, and they address all of the issues that are challenging the church today, as we're going to see. So what is classical philosophy? Classical philosophy would be the philosophy of Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas. Philosophy in general deals with how do we explain reality, how do we understand reality. Philosophy is the discipline that actually touches on all of the disciplines of inquiry, all of the different disciplines of, you have math and science and you have history. All of those, you have to do philosophy to actually do the other disciplines. That's why you get a PhD, which stands for philosophy doctor, in computer science, PhD in biology, et cetera, PhD in physics. All of those you're doing philosophy. So what is classical philosophy? Classical philosophy deals with how do we define truth, discover truth, think about truth. It studies the truth about reality and how do we behave towards truth. Now, as you can tell, philosophy has been taken out of our educational system. Can you tell? Because that is the missing part. Often today, you'll hear people say, well, we have science, and then we have the sphere of religion and morality and values. And they're seen as though they are these two separate spheres of thought. And they'll say, well, I keep my science separate from my religion. Well, there's actually a discipline that unites them all. And what is that? It is philosophy. Philosophy is the discipline that's grounded in observation and experience, and it verifies religion, and it verifies what is proper moral behavior. So philosophy undergirds and unites all of the disciplines. That is the missing part. That's why it's so important. Our next part of the trifecta is classical theology. Classical theology establishes the existence of God, attributes of God, the acts of God, meaning miracles and prophecies. And then we have the last piece, classical apologetics, which, as we've already talked about, the triangle, establishing the proper philosophical foundation, the truth of theism, and the truth of Christianity. So here's why you care about the trifecta. It has lots of practical value for you to help you understand God, how to understand reality, how to respond to objections to the faith. It also helps with current issues. It helps you if you're going to be talking to somebody who is a pantheist, somebody who is a relativist. It actually helps address the new morality. It helps you define family, marriage, etc. Now, I've introduced these two diagrams to you of the three-step method and the trifecta. So what's the difference? Because they're kind of related here. First of all, we use these first two pieces, classical philosophy and classical theology, we use those to do apologetics. But they cover more topics than just apologetics. So think of the three-step method kind of flowing out of that classical apologetics piece of the trifecta. So the entire pyramid would be classical apologetics. So think of it like this. You have the evidences for the Christian faith, meaning historical evidence for Jesus, et cetera. He fulfilled prophecies. And then we have classical theology plus classical philosophy. You add those three together, what do you get? Classical apologetics. So now let's zoom in here and look at the truth of the Christian faith. Let's look at our evidence section of the pyramid here from the three-step method. We have, first of all, establishing that the Bible is historically reliable. Miracles and prophecy show that the Bible is from God, because only God can do miracles and make long-term prophecies. And then Jesus' resurrection would be the miracle that verifies the gospel message. Now, this basically was my pyramid when I first got into apologetics. That's all I knew was the evidential approach. And it was sufficient for leading some people to the Lord. It was all I needed to actually have my faith restored. But it's not enough to be effective in your evangelism for everybody. It doesn't answer all of our questions. Well, then I ended up studying under Norman Geisler, and suddenly that changed everything. I realized, well, that's the missing part. And one of those missing parts is the second step of our pyramid, as you can see, the arguments for God's existence. And then also the first step. I was missing the first two steps. So the philosophical foundation. Now, I know you look at that and you see all those fancy words down there, veritology, epistemology, foundationalism, metaphysics. After you understand what they mean, they're not as scary. Well, the Bible assumes those philosophical positions, and they are actually part of the Christian worldview, all right? Now, first of all, back up to our evidence portion of the method. We cannot always appeal to the Bible in evangelism. You can try to, but if somebody doesn't believe in God, appealing to the Bible is not gonna do anything. They're gonna be like, well, I don't think God wrote that. It does work with a lot of people, so I'm not saying it can't work. It can lead a lot of people to the Lord. So in evangelism, sometimes it's not always effective because you need something else. And when it comes to civil law and politics, you can't appeal to the Bible and say, well, here's how we should define marriage because that's how the Bible defines it. So you can't always use that last step of the pyramid without the others. You can use step 1 and step 2. You can use philosophical foundation and the argument for God's existence. You can use that anywhere because you don't have to appeal to the Bible for that. You're appealing directly to reason. Now, just to recap everything before we move on to our next section, to justify being a Christian, I need reasons for believing Christianity is true and that the Bible is from God. But if the Bible is from God, that would mean I'm presupposing that there's a God. So to justify that Christianity is true fully, to know that Christianity is true, I must also what? Know that there's a God. But to know that there's a God, I must know that the truth about reality is knowable. So you can see how all three of these are gonna be necessary for a complete apologetic system. Now, our last thing we're gonna be talking about today for the remainder of our session is the three-step method. Okay, we're gonna go right through the pyramid and I'm gonna give you a quick overview of the three-step method. So veritology, the correspondence view of truth. Veritas, by the way, is the Latin word for truth. How do we define truth? The way we define truth is really important, especially today when people are denying the objective truth is even real. The correspondence view of truth goes like this. Truth is that which corresponds to reality or to its object. This is the correspondence view of truth. If I have a belief in my mind, if it corresponds to reality, external reality, then it is a true belief. You're also gonna need to learn how to identify a self-defeating position. And in my sessions when I teach how to identify self-defeating positions, I like to use myself in the pictures. That's a picture of me. And my children are going to be responding to me and they're gonna be defeating dad. So if I said, there's no such thing as truth, well, that's a truth claim that I'm making about reality. I'm claiming that it's true, that there's no such thing as truth. So what is a helpful way that you can respond to somebody? What question could you ask them to show that that position is self-defeating? If I said, there's no such thing as truth, you would ask me, is that true? Because I'm making a truth claim. Because if I say no, then I'm in trouble. If I say yes, then I'm in trouble. It refutes my position either way. What if I said, well, you can't know the truth about reality. We're trapped in our minds. We can't really know the truth about reality. What would you ask me? You would ask me, do you know that truth about reality? Because I'm claiming to know a truth about reality, which is that it's unknowable. It's a self-defeating position. And what if I said, there's nothing that's true for everybody to believe? You could ask me, is that true for everybody to believe? In fact, you could ask me, is relativism true for everybody? Because if a relativist says, yes, it's true for everybody, then relativism is false. If he says, no, it's not true for everybody, then why should I be a relativist? It's true for him, not for me. You see? It self-defeats. What if I said, if something is true, it has to be scientifically observable? What would you say? What question could you ask me to show me that that position is self-defeating? You could just ask me, is that truth scientifically observable? Where did you get that from? Did you do a scientific experiment to discover that truth? Because that's not a thing that you can do an experiment on. In fact, you could ask me, is scientism scientifically observable? What is scientism? Is that something that you saw? Did you smell it? Is scientism a thing you can experiment on? What color is scientism? Can you touch it? Is it fuzzy? Can you lick it? No, it's a philosophical idea. So a self-defeating position is a position that refutes itself. It's the first test that we can use to see if a philosophical position can actually be true. If it self-defeats, it cannot be true. Now, next, epistemology. Epistemology just means the study of knowledge. How do we know things? All right? Classical empiricism, I'm going to argue, is the only method or only system of knowledge that does not self-defeat. So this has to do with the way we discover truth. Now, classical empiricism is going to be the epistemological system of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. Remember, all that means is that's their system of knowledge. How do you come to know the truth about reality? And here's what classical empiricism is. It is the position that knowledge is built as we observe reality, and then our minds extract these true principles about reality. We extract these forms of objects, right? Let me show you some illustrations so you can see what I mean. When I look at an apple, my mind goes, no, 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 no. You see that? The form of the apple goes, no, 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 into my mind. So if I told you, I want you to think about a dog, is the dog's matter in your mind right now? No. So what's in your mind then? The form of the dog's in your mind, the concept of it. So that's how learning works, is external reality is being brought into your mind. So these true principles are going, no, 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 being brought into your mind. For example, if I said to you, dogs are pack animals, well, how do I know that? Because I observe dogs interacting with each other, but I've never observed pack animalness as though that's a thing. Do you see pack animalness? No. You got that concept by understanding that they are always together, relating with one another. Same thing with mammal. Have you ever seen mammal? Have you ever looked at an animal and be like, that animal, that's just a mammal? Is there an animal that's just mammal? No, mammal, that's a category that includes lots of different animals, right? We do philosophy every time we extract these principles from reality. And the principles themselves are not observed, they are what we call abstracted. That's why the mammal is not something that you saw as a being. That's an abstract category that we created in our minds, but it's really based in reality, not some physical being out there. It's an abstract concept. So sense experience plus reason, that's where we get knowledge and understanding. In some way, all knowledge is connected to sense experience. Thomas Aquinas said this: the intellect depends on the sense for the origin of knowledge. All of our knowledge is in some way grounded in what we observe through our senses. In classical empiricism, knowledge starts with reality, with real things, and then it is imposed upon us. Now, if you have a different starting point, you're gonna have a different end point. So in classical philosophy, we start off saying truth is objective, and knowledge begins with things, with reality, and then it comes into our minds receive it. So my sex and gender, for example, to talk about a modern issue, my sex and gender is grounded in reality, and it's imposed upon me, that truth. And if I know that, then that would mean that that is a truth that corresponds to reality. Whereas if you look at today's philosophy, they'll say, well, truth is subjective. Knowledge begins with my mind. Therefore, my sex and gender comes from my mind. Instead of coming from reality, it's coming from my mind would be the source of it. If you have the wrong starting point, you're gonna have the wrong ending point. Now, what about the scientific method itself? What is that? Because science is good, but what is that? Observation, hypothesis, test, all of that. What is the scientific method? That is the philosophy of how to do science. That's what that is. Do you observe the scientific method? What does it look like, smell like, taste like? What does it feel like? What kind of noises does it make? No, you don't observe it. So where do you get it from? You go like this. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. You extract it into your mind. That a good way to know the truth about reality or the natural universe is to use the scientific method. Well, what if somebody said this? We can't know that there's a God because we can't detect God scientifically with our senses. I don't see God. What color is God? He doesn't make any noises that I've ever heard. There's no reason to think that he exists. However, we can know God's existence because it is known through what? Abstracted principles. In fact, the Bible teaches that. The Bible actually teaches classical empiricism. Look at this. Romans 1 says this: for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, divine nature, have been seen, being understood from what has been made. So my son Caleb here, at one point, did not exist. He was only a potential being. He'd exist in my mind as an idea, but not in external reality. So how did he get here? Well, I'm going to go act on his potential and bring him into existence. Obviously, my wife did a lot more work than I did to actualize Caleb's development and everything, but I am the same kind of being that Caleb is. So we've got a problem. If I'm potential and Caleb is potential, how did I get here? How are we gonna get Caleb here? You have to have somebody prior to me. That's my mom. Yep, that's my mom. My mom is going to then actualize my existence, and then I'm gonna play a role in actualizing Caleb's existence. Now, all beings that are potential beings are beings that at one point were only potential. So right now, Caleb would be an actual being, but also he will always be a potential being in some way. He has the potential to learn, just like you have the potential to listen to what I'm saying. You have the potential to daydream. You have the potential to walk, to sit down. But a potential being also, potentiality applies to their existence. Their potential to exist and to not exist. They will always in some way be a potential being. So here's why I'm going over all this. If you look at our diagram here, if you have pure potential beings, you have to have something that's actual to cause the potential beings to begin to exist. So you can see here, something has to get the chain going. So once you have an actual being, that actual being can then actualize a potential being's existence. They can become actualized and then exist. But we got a problem. What if all beings were potential beings? Nothing would exist. If everything is the kind of being that has potentiality, how could it ever begin? How did we get here? You have to have something that's actual to actualize the potential of a potential being. So how could it ever start? The entire chain would be dependent on something prior. So what kind of being has to exist? Yeah, something that is only actual. A pure actual being with no potential has to exist. And then from there, that being is gonna go actualizing all the other beings. And this is the being that we call God. So this is the being that we call God. God is pure actuality with no potential. Now, it sounds like a cut down when you say, God, you just don't have any potential. That's because he's actualized all of his attributes. He has no potential because he's just pure actuality. So what would a being with no potential be like? Now, this is really cool. This is one of my favorite things to explain to people. This means God has no potential for non-existence. He has to exist. He's a pure actual being. He can't be destroyed. He has no potential to stop existing. And also, he has no potential to change. You can't add to God. You can't take away from God. He just is what he is. So think of it like this. If God is pure actuality, has no potential, does he have the potential to learn? No. Because he has full actual knowledge. He already knows everything. He doesn't learn anything. And if God has no potential, then that means he has no potential to move from here to over here. Why not? Because he has full actual existence everywhere. He has complete actualized existence. He's already here to there. So if he's pure actuality, he can't move. He has no potential to move. Why? Because he's already everywhere. To move somewhere would mean you're not there, but he's everywhere. He has no potential. And he does not have the potential to learn. He does not have the potential to stop loving you. A being who has pure actuality and loves is a being who loves all, which means God has no potential to stop loving you. I want you to let that sink in. That means God has to love you. It's grounded in God's being. His love for us is grounded in him. Isn't that cool? He can't stop loving you. So if you ever wondered, does God love me? Yes, he always will. And if God has pure actualized, if he's pure actuality in his mind, how many thoughts does he think? All thoughts. God has all thoughts always. He doesn't have the potential to think about this and then think about that because he's already thinking about all things. In one act of the divine mind, God actually thinks all thoughts always, which means how long has God thought about you? Always. God literally cannot get you out of his mind. Isn't that cool? So this means that there has to be something out there that is an uncaused being. Something just exists. It has to be this way. It can't be that everything has a cause, because then the whole chain would be potential. Something has to be uncaused and just exists. If God is pure actuality, That means existence describes him. He is existence itself, as we're gonna see, is what that would mean. God is identical to existence. He can't not exist. Existence is not one of my attributes because I have the ability to stop existing. It doesn't describe me. I am in existence, just like I'm in this room right now, but I'm not identical to the room. I am in God because God is existence. We know the name of this being, don't we? Because he tells us in Exodus. Look at that. God said to Moses, I am who I am. Tell them I am has sent you. The divine name Yahweh is the noun form of the verb to be. God just is. God is, Yahweh is the infinite, uncaused, pure actual, self-existing God that is existence itself. That's why God started off with that. I want you to know, God is saying, who I am the infinite, uncaused, eternal God. Isn't that cool? That's where we should start with our attributes of God. As Hebrews says, he upholds the universe by the word of his power. And John 1 says, all things came into being through him. Apart from him, nothing came into being. Now, do you see how we just demonstrated that philosophy and theology are interrelated? They're integrated. Isn't that cool? See how they all go together? To show that, yeah, the Bible and philosophy, they go together. How we define truth affects everything that we believe. It's not just Christians, everybody, all humans, everyone has to address what truth is. So there's our trifecta, our three-step method. So this would be our complete system, firmly grounded in the truth. Doesn't the Bible warn about philosophy? So why am I up here saying philosophy is good? Listen to Aristotle. He wasn't a Christian. Now, that's actually exactly what I thought. When I never got into philosophy until I went to Southern Evangelical Seminary and started learning from Norman Geisler, because my view of philosophy was that it was just something that the Greeks did. But now we have science, and I'm gonna use archaeology. That's why I just kind of ignored all the philosophy. I think that's what a lot of Christians do. The Bible is not saying that philosophy itself is bad. It's talking about bad philosophy. As C.S. Lewis said, you need to study philosophy if for no other reason, just so you can learn how to refute the bad philosophy out there. We wouldn't say that everything Aristotle said is false. In fact, a lot of what he taught is actually in line with the Bible. So whenever you read a book, you're doing philosophy. I mean, you're not doing science. What are you doing? When you listen to me speak, you're hearing me talk, and then my words are coming into your mind, and you're extracting the principles. You're doing philosophy right now. You can't not do philosophy. You have to do philosophy. So the Bible is simply not saying that all philosophy is bad. In fact, Jesus is called the Logos. In the beginning was the Word is with God, the Word was God, which is where we get the word logic from, which logic is a branch of philosophy. So God does want us to know the truth. Well, that's epistemology. And then truth would be veritology, the study of truth. And then knowing that God exists. Well, now I'm doing metaphysics. Metaphysics is how you study the existence of things, the natures of things. So the Bible actually refers to what would fit in the category of philosophy all the time. But yes, beware the bad philosophy. So I would say classical philosophy that's the good stuff. That's why you have the Geislerian trifecta, which has philosophy and theology and also apologetics. So I'm not saying that philosophy is all you need. Philosophy alone, yeah, is incomplete. I mean, you can't get to God just using philosophy. To be a member of the new covenant, you're gonna have to accept what is taught in the scriptures. So philosophy can get you to believing that there is a God and can help you understand that there's a moral law, that I've broken the moral law, that justice is real, I deserve justice, but then it ends. That's why deism, philosophical deism, actually, it can tell you that there's a problem with the world and that there's a designer, but then it stops. To keep on going, you need what God reveals to us in the scriptures, and that God reveals what his salvation plan is. And when you become a member of the covenant, then that's how you can see the entire plan that God has, that God is loving, so it would make sense for him to then make a way to forgive me and to punish my sins without punishing me, that God is infinitely merciful, infinitely just. I don't have to take my own punishment, but God, through Christ takes it for me. how can you compare the parable of the seeds, the sower sows, with how can you be grounded in the faith? How are the two related? Well, in the parable of the sower, you have the seed represents the word of God as being sown, and then some lands on rock, some the bird comes and eats, the birds come eat, and then some are actually, by the cares of this world, it strangles it so it can't bear fruit, and then you have one actually bears fruit. So we all want to be the one who bears fruit. In that parable, it kind of represents, throughout the Christian life, you can be one of those seeds at different times, but I see it kind of like, if I don't have a strong foundation and my friends are telling me that my biblical definition for truth is off, or that, what about other religions? Can't they also be true? Are you saying that everybody's going to hell who's not a Christian? Or are you going to say that same-sex relationship, that it's not something that's accepted by God? I may actually really be tempted, for social reasons, to abandon my worldview, and that would be kind of like the cares of this world. It would be like the thorns are actually strangling the word of God, that I am tempted to, in order to be accepted by others, to blow off my foundation. So I would say that if you are grounded firm in the faith, and you know that it is rational to believe that the Bible is God's word, you have reasons for that, you're not easily going to be swayed by these arguments, because you're going to know that you're going to know what's true. And so if you have a deep root that has grown, then you're not going to give in so quickly to some of these bad philosophies, because they're coming at us nonstop, and they've been doing it for thousands of years. All of these ideas have been coming at the church and at God's people. If I struggle with doubt, does that mean something's wrong with me, that I'm not a Christian? Not at all. In fact, doubt is normal. If you notice in the Bible, it says after Jesus rose from the dead, that his disciples doubted. After they'd seen him rise from the dead, and they knew about the predictions of the Messiah, they're still doubting. And it's totally normal to doubt. And that's because the way that we know things by observation, experience, etc., but God gives us sufficient evidence to know that the Christian faith is true. He does not give us exhaustive evidence, okay? He gives us just enough clues. If I follow the clues, I can conclude it is rational, it's true. But he also leaves out just enough so that I always have the option to not believe. I always have that. And so there's a fallacy called the stacking the deck fallacy, which is where you kind of cheat so that your position can win. You can always commit the stacking the deck fallacy and say, well, if there really was a God, then he would appear to me. He would appear to the United Nations and then say, see, I am real. But the problem is, if God appeared like that, then suddenly what does that get rid of? Totally gets rid of free will, because now you're obligated to believe, because now it's obviously true. And that totally gets rid of the option to reject God, and it means now you are forced to know and to love. And if God's goal, and one of his goals for us in this life, is that you willingly do choose to love him. So he has given us everything we need to know that he is real, but he leaves out just enough also. So it's not this overwhelming evidence that overrides my freedom.